contemplate not doing this project with those guys. So we asked him, why wouldn't you do that? And he said, I've built a partnership over the last 2 years with them, and it's very important to me. But those guys in Spain, they are such in a difficult situation, and I have to rescue them. So it's 2011. We're talking about Senegal rescuing a small Senegalese corporation, rescuing an SME, a Spanish SME. And this anecdote tells something about the way the world is going. The fact that we have now moved in 2011 for the first year at a stage where the GDP of the non-OECD countries will be higher than the GDP of the OECD countries. And it's also leading us to try to see whether we can't find ways out of the major economic crisis the OECD world is facing by introducing new partners in the game. And let me very briefly explain that. We have built a relationship between OECD and basically the emerging countries that is now very difficult to solve because the huge balance of payment surpluses that have been built over the past 3 or 4 decades in the unbalanced trade terms that we have maintained, also to our benefit, the benefit of the GDP growth in Europe, for instance, so those trade balances have become unsustainable, as we know, but it's also very difficult to imagine how we are going to reduce those imbalances and hence our debt problem and our growth problem on our side, because it's going to be extremely difficult for our non-OECD partners, especially, China, the East Asian economies, which I know well, not only to slow down their trade surpluses or their surpluses in balance of payments, but get into a stage where they have to maintain deficits. Actually, we cannot adjust our global economy if the large world growing economies do not enter into a deficit mode, because we have to, if China right now is not really adjusting, Europe is not really adjusting, and if you simply refer to the latest IMF reports, you will, over the global economy, you will see that we are deepening continuously right now the major imbalances that we have entered in. And it's going to be very difficult for Europe, for instance, to go into the devaluation mode for the euro that we need in order to reboost our competitiveness, just because the surplus countries will continue flowing their money into our own currencies. So we have to readjust globally, and it's going to take decades if we just focus on our OECD emerging economies relationship. Now, what is important to notice is that in the world such as it is being shaped, you have now the emerging economies and the OECD are just about half of the world population. And the rest, about 3 billion people, are in still non-emerged or non-emerging economies, including the poor countries. And those 3 billion people will grow into close to 6 over a period of 30 or 40 years. And if you look at the global rebalancing, you have 2 win-win situations for the global economy. One is that those 6 billion people enter in a relationship with the emerging economies, which looks like the type of relationship that the emerging economies have had vis-à-vis the OECD. So i.e., if we see a large shift of the lower skilled manufacturing industry from the emerging economies towards those developing countries, and if, to some extent, the current emerging economies maintain surpluses vis-à-vis the OECD, but create deficits vis-à-vis those new economies, while those economies also have deficits vis-à-vis us, the OECD. So this is one way you can rebalance the global economy. Another way is that this major part of the world, this is the majority of the world, starts a growth process that would be domestically oriented. The type of growth that we have learned at university 30 or 40 years ago, when those of us were studying economics, that this should be the way the world should develop. I mean, you grow, you invest, and hence you run deficits against the rest of the world. So this type of economic process has not taken place actually in the past 40 or 50 years. This has been, on the contrary, the export-oriented models that have been extremely successful. Now, if this very large part of the world succeeds in building a new type of development, then this will have a major rebalancing impact on the world economy. And at the core of the question is the place of Africa. Africa is going, you started, Dick, with demography. Africa is going to reach, in the coming 30 years, about 1.8 billion people minimum, probably more. If you maintain, the second news is that, which is already all over the place, is that growth has resumed. In the past decade, Africa has enjoyed above 5% per annum growth rate. If you maintain this trend, which is, of course, a theoretical assumption, over the next 30 decades, then 3 decades, then in about sometime between 2040 and 2050, sub-Saharan Africa will enjoy an absolute GDP that will be equal to the size of the current Chinese GDP. Okay? So we are not talking about numbers that are irrelevant and unimportant to the global rebalancing. And when I'm talking about Africa, of course, I'm not talking about Pakistan, Bangladesh, Indonesia, etc. I mean, the new and future giants of either the poor East Asia or South Asia that are not yet really in this emerging economy process. So questions then that might have been in the past seen as kind of ethical, social, become suddenly extraordinarily important about our future. And they are the types of questions that you have mentioned and which are in the book that I've written with Olivier Rey. Thank you, Dick, for mentioning it. You know, is Africa's growth process going to continue? And it's very important to answer that question, and I will not be long on that because I think the discussion will probably will focus on this type of question. It's important to highlight that there have been objective reasons for the recession that Africa has unfortunately been through in the last 3 decades. The structural adjustment process has been extremely tough on Africa. By the way, there are many lessons to draw out of this structural adjustment process from Africa for the structural adjustment process that Greece, Spain, Italy, maybe France, and others will have to go through. There have been many mistakes that have been made and explain the length of the adjustment process in this part of the world. But you know, not only, so we had very objective reasons to explain why this recession has been so long, so deep, and to some extent, the understanding of this reason leads us to understand why the current growth expansion of Africa is there to last. Because macroeconomic policies have changed, because the indebtedness situation of Africa has changed. Now, Africa is the less indebted continent in the world, because the demographic, and especially the demographic dividend that Africa is now enjoying, is going to create an engine of growth that is there to last for about 70 to 80 years. So it's the most open demographic window, beneficial demographic window we have ever known in human history. So those factors are going to completely pull the African continent in a place that is absolutely unthinkable when we look at the past and we look at Africa through the lenses that we have used in the past decades to speak and think about it. So neither compassion, ethics, social, nor the kind of benign neglect about economics, finance, etc., is going to be relevant to discuss Africa's future in the coming years. And I will end on that note. I think one of the most important things that we have to do now while I mean, our governments are focusing on the everyday management of the financial crisis, the regulation of financial institutions, and so forth. Very important things that have to be done right now. So one of the most important things that we can do in a kind of think tank mode is to start addressing the longer term issues about world competitiveness, OECD competitiveness, Europe's competitiveness, and so forth, the relation to the world, and the type of big macro regulations that we have to push forward in order to drag us out of a crisis and eventually address the growth problems, the growth issues that we are faced, and not only the financial indebtedness issues that are obsessing us, I mean, for good reasons right now. And finishing on that, addressing those global rebalancing issues is not something that is just about, I mean, big fuzzy thing. Let's remember that in the 70s, after the first oil shock, we had a lot of talk about the petrodollar reshuffling, refinancing. This was one of the big issues on the table. This was, by the way, partly done. We know that one of its effects, also as a footnote, was the over-indebtment in some of the emerging economies, especially Latin America. So we know that it is big stuff that may fail as well. So it's something that we should rather address and talk about in a very aggressive and thoughtful way. Thank you very much.